Our faith in the United States, having faith doesn't cost us very much. But in many places in the world, it does. It can cost people their lives. So I'm going to read to you from my favorite book, my second favorite book. I have two favorite books. I can't really decide between them. You already know about Mere Christianity. This is The Cost of Discipleship by Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Keep reading it. Yeah, I'll give it to you after the week. Okay? Look on. I'm not sure how that happened. When I was a sophomore in college, before that time, by the way, I would tell you that I didn't like to read. And I took a class my sophomore year. There was a religion class you had to take, and then you had to take two more religion classes of your choice. And so I chose a class called God, Faith, and Autobiography. And we read the autobiographies of a bunch of famous Christians from throughout time, and or books by them that told us something about them. And up until that time, I would have told you I don't like to read. And I took this class. There was nothing especially special about the class. I mean, the teacher was like, I don't know, 96 years old. He was like almost blind, so he didn't. I mean, if he didn't show up, he didn't even know. And there was one point he didn't know his student's name. There was one point where a girl raised her hand in the back, and he said, "Blondie." Was blonde, and it was just he wasn't. He was ready to retire. But I read these books, and that's when I read the Cost of Discipleship. And that's when I read Mere Christianity, and I realized I love to read. I just don't love to read novels, and that's what they make you read in school. I didn't want to read novels. Give me some nonfiction. Give me some theology. So this is a quote from Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Anybody heard of Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Anybody know about Dietrich Bonhoeffer? Your teachers? Good job.
My mom.
Oh, your mom. Great. Yeah. So Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor in Germany. And he was a Lutheran pastor in Germany during Hitler's reign. And the Third Reich did not allow the gospel to be preached, and so the pastors of the Third Reich were very censored in what they could and could not say, and largely they went along with that because they knew to not go along with that would mean prison, in a Nazi prison. Dietrich Bonhoeffer refused to go along, and he was imprisoned. And shortly before the Allies reached his camp, he was executed for his faith. But years before that, he wrote this book called The Cost of Discipleship, which is masterful and beautiful and difficult all at the same time. Not difficult to read in the sense of the words, but in the content, and challenging as well. So he has this idea of cheap grace. He's talking about this idea of cheap grace, that grace that doesn't cost much. So this is the quote. Cheap grace means grace sold on the market like Cheap Jack's wares. Think Dollar Tree. The sacraments, the forgiveness of sin, and the consolations of religion are thrown away at cut prices. Grace is represented as the church's inexhaustible treasury from which she showers blessings with generous hands, without asking questions or fixing limits. Grace without price, grace without cost. The essence of grace, we suppose, is that the account has been paid in advance, and because it has been paid, everything can be had for nothing. Since the cost was infinite, the possibilities of using and spending it are infinite. What would grace be if it were not cheap? Cheap grace means the justification of sin without the justification of the sinner. Grace alone does everything, they say, so everything can remain as it was before. Well then, let the Christian live like the rest of the world. Let him model himself on the world's standards in every sphere of life, and not presumptuously aspire to live a different life under grace from his old life under sin. Cheap grace is the preaching of forgiveness without requiring repentance, baptism without church discipline, communion without confession, absolution, the forgiveness of sins, without personal confession. Cheap grace is grace without discipleship, grace without the cross, grace without Jesus Christ, living and incarnate. Costly grace is the treasure hidden in a field. For the sake of it, a man will go and sell all that he has. It is the pearl of great price to buy, which the merchant will sell all his goods. It is the kingly rule of Christ, for whose sake a man will pluck out the eye which causes him to stumble. It is the call of Jesus Christ, at which the disciple leaves his nets and follows him. Costly grace is the gospel which must be sought again and again, the gift that must be asked for, the door at which a man must knock. This last part is the most important part. Such grace is costly because it calls us to follow, and it is grace because it calls us to follow Jesus Christ. It is costly because it costs a man his life, and it is grace because it gives the man the only true life. It is costly because it condemns sin, and it is grace because it justifies the sinner. Above all, it is costly because it cost God the life of his Son. You were bought at a price. And what has cost God much cannot be cheap for us. Above all, it is grace because God did not reckon his own Son's life too dear a price to pay, but delivered him up for us. Costly grace is the incarnation of God. You know my story. We talked about that. We talked about Whitney. And that time in college when I don't know if wandered is the right way, but I certainly wasn't living the way God intended me to. There was this battle going on inside of me. And I think I began to believe in grace. Oddly enough, that time was just before I took that class. And I don't want to live like that. There's no, I mean, people call it like 1 foot in heaven and 1 foot in the world, but I don't think that can be done. We're either for or not. So the price for Christ was his life. How could we ever want to cheapen that? So there is a serious cost to following Christ. Not as much in our country country, but all over the world, Christians are being martyred and mutilated and mistreated, which should cause us to both cause us to want to pray for those people, but also to work for their release or their freedom for that. So God also He provides provides blessings for obedience. But the compromised life, and I know this from my own life, will encounter discipline, heartache, and hardship. It forfeits the blessing that might otherwise be ours. And those blessings remain even in our darkest hours. And as your book puts it, God also provides blessings for keep obedience. So, what is faith? I think that we're going to stop here, because this is where we started last hour. And you can just relax and